you ready for a deep dive on a build in a game that is 4 years old? Because I sure as hell am. Let's just jump right into it, guys. So why did I remake my crystal build from before, which was just using the Aquamarine Dagger and the Greatsword of Judgment? Well, that's because those are pretty inefficient weapons. In order to use the Greatsword of Judgment effectively, you have to apply the buff, which just kind of like weighs you down, like in a momentum way. Every time you want to do good damage, you have to reapply the buff. Which, yeah, it's a shockwave, but then you gotta stand there, and hopefully someone doesn't roll backstab you while you're firing a shockwave at them. The other is that every time you switch to the Aquamarine Dagger, you lose your buff on the Greatsword of Judgment, so I just went offhand Rapier, main hand Greatsword. When choosing the weapons for this build, I completely prioritized range over everything else. The Crystal Sage's Rapier is the longest thrusting sword in the game, and the Flamberge is the second longest greatsword in the game. And the damage is almost identical. I think it's like each one of these is only like 10 points of AR off of their most efficient counterparts. So I basically have this rangy build that does equivalent, if not the exact same damage, to hyper efficient builds. And the biggest benefit of all of that is that it allows me just to have all of the mix-ups in the world. And you have to time your rolls very well against this build, because otherwise panic rolls just kind of get caught by this little blender I've created. When I was putting together the footage for this video, I was trying to analyze exactly what I'm doing differently now. And the biggest thing I've noticed is that I'm much more momentum based. Before, I was constantly just looking for trades, which requires a lot of going back to neutral, and then looking for a trade with a straight sword usually, or just some other non-hyper armor weapon. But now I'm just constantly trying to create some sort of momentum, and I honestly like it when I'm getting chased down, because that kind of funnels your opponent into exactly what they're going to do, which is attack you, which can lead to turn and stuff like that. But mostly trying to get them on their heels and predict what they're going to do, which most of the time is panic roll. So it's kind of just shifted how I play down to prediction, but mostly just forcing my opponents to do what I want them to do, which a lot of the time is panic roll, and this build is exactly designed to catch panic rolls. Something this build also allows me to do is to take on groups of phantoms around the bonfire much easier than before. Whereas before I would definitely need mob support. Now I just can kind of run in there, and if I can get the drop on one phantom and get him down low, I can usually just put him away with the rapier. Just knocking off one phantom from a party makes things so much more manageable. So I've been attempting that a lot more and having a lot more success because of this build. A smaller change I've made to this build is I started using Goddards over other straight swords, simply because of the range. As I've talked about, the range is kind of what this build is all about. But this gives me a little bit of an opportunity to talk about why the magic system in this game sucks. Before, in previous games, you had a limited number of casts of your most powerful spell, and once you fired those off, you were done. That was it. You had to be wise with how you were firing those spells. But here we have two mages in Dark Souls 3, and the only thing they can think to cast is the same spell over and over again. And then they're incentivized to be passive because they've traded all of their health away for blue Estus flasks. So they just want to roll around, which is why I'm using Goddards. Now let's talk a little bit more about greatswords, and the Flamberge specifically. Yes, it's still a greatsword. Yes, it still cracks open, unupgraded shields. But it does a couple other things that I like a lot about it. Yeah, the Flamberge has a bleed auxiliary, although I've never bled anyone out using a Flamberge on this build. It's just too little, and I usually hit people enough with this weapon that they die before they have a chance to bleed out. So it really doesn't add up like it does on, say, the Corpian Greatscythe. Like I've said before, it has this longer range, although I don't notice it quite as much when I'm two-handing, just because my two-handed style of play is still focused on using hyper armor to win trades. In general, I really love greatswords in Dark Souls 3 because you have hyper armor in this nice chopping motion with the two-handed moveset, and then the one-handed moveset can hit multiple opponents and have this nice wide arcing swing to it. But what's really the best thing about the Flamberge is its R2 weapon art. Just get deleted. It's so nice to see these just like anime movesets in our game about knights get absolutely shit on by pressing a button, and you just shut their whole like game plan down. We're like Freed Scythe users, this Crow Talons user, these movesets which tend to be from the DLC that have just this really long flashy animation, but the big part of it is that it's really long, so they're just going to keep doing it over and over again, but they become super easy to punish with stuff like the Flamberge's weapon art. Plus, the Flamberge in particularly does insane counter damage, like way more than the Claymore does, way more than other weapons that have this exact same moveset to their weapon art. You can even use the weapon art as a roll catch if people want to roll towards or around you. And on this build, an R1 weapon art R2 combo is something like almost 1100, almost 1200 damage. So that's almost always enough to kill a Phantom. Can often, in many cases, be enough to kill a host. Like you just saw there, it's also really helpful to stay aggressive out of the R2. A lot of Phantoms will see, you do a big attack, and there's kind of this assumption that there's going to be a big recovery after that, but there isn't for the weapon art R2. So you can go directly from weapon art R2 into R1s as long as you have the stamina to do it, which happened there, which killed off Phantom, which led to this host dying shortly after. The weapon art R2 also has just enough forward momentum to be a roll catch if timed properly. As if the weapon didn't have enough utility as is, it has a shield splitting R1 weapon art, but the R2 weapon art works almost better because it still does the job, and if someone doesn't have their shield up or they're going to attack you in the middle of that, they take 500 damage. So for me, I pretty much only use the R2 weapon art. It's just that much more useful. Something I've been using a lot more as well with this build is the Hornet Ring, which before I'd always picked up the Hornet Ring for characters and then just left it in the bottomless box, simply because I had this philosophy of like, well, I'm not going to beat people just by doing a lot of damage on riposts. I'm going to beat people in other ways. But I found myself getting a lot more riposts, and I was like, okay, situationally, this is something I could probably use. So I got the riposte there with the shield break, and this guy really loves going for parries. But so now I'm thinking, okay, these guys are pretty susceptible. That guy likes to put a shield up a lot, especially after he does a bunch of swings, and these guys are constantly swinging twice. So I'm just thinking to myself, okay, if I get another chance to break that shield, I'm going to try to make the most out of it, and I'm going to swap to the Hornet Ring. I've noticed in large part that a whole bunch of hosts in this game don't upgrade their shields. They focus on the weapon and what armor they're using, but what upgrade level your shield on is really, really important here for your stability. And yeah, even a Black Knight shield, which is a really great shield, is going to crack after 2 swings from a greatsword. Just a regular greatsword, not even an ultra greatsword. I guess I should explain my thought process on the situational swapping to the Hornet Ring instead of just always wearing it like I see a ton of invaders do. I guess it's more of just that there's other rings I could wear that would provide me more constant benefits than a Hornet Ring. It's not that often that I'm backstabbing or taking riposts, and Lord knows I ever parry. But I am constantly regenerating stamina, and I'm constantly healing, so the Estus ring is also another option. And I'm constantly looking for an escape, so the Silver Cat ring is another option. For me, it's just, I'm not going to waste a ring slot on something that might occur in an invasion when I 100% know I will be healing, I'll be regenerating stamina, and I very likely will be jumping off a ledge in an invasion. Here's another example of me using the Hornet Ring situationally. I know this Phantom was not looking at me because he had his bow out, and they're doing that really stupid thing that you see parties do sometimes, which is try to kill the dragon with arrows instead of just playing through the level. I see a surprising amount of invaders whose entire game plan it is to get backstabs and parries, and of course they're using the Hornet Ring or some combination of that and an elemental dagger to really maximize the damage they're getting out of their criticals. But it tends to make them extremely predictable players to fight against if you know that's their entire game plan. If you know how to avoid being parried, and you know the little baits that a lot of parry kings go for, those builds really just kind of fall apart against more experienced players. And if you're trying to make a more diverse and invasion-ready build, one that entirely relies upon criticals is gonna fail a lot of the time. Maybe that build worked really great at launch when nobody knew how to avoid being parried, but that's just not the case anymore. Lastly, let's talk about fighting other players who actually know how to PvP, not just parties. For this character, I've left Lothric and Lorien alive at SL72, so I can still get invaded throughout the Grand Archives, which is not only my favorite place to invade, but also to be invaded, because I can do a lot of Dreadfinger runs through the level when I want to. So I still play against a lot of invaders a lot of the time, which is healthy for me to do, so I'm not just used to playing against people who have no idea what they're doing. This particular opponent reminds me a ton of myself from when I first started doing invasions, where he's kind of just looking to outdamage and outtrade me with a bit of a poised up build and two-handed greatsword, which is really not a bad strategy at all. But you can kind of see a couple gaps in his game that I've really made efforts to improve on, like spacing, and also just aggression, when to back off and when to let your enemy whiff so you can punish them. There's this really big difference in how I moved initially when I first started invading versus now, where I'm constantly sprinting between swings, and then I'm constantly looking to put pressure on, take pressure off, and just ultimately be unpredictable and constantly throwing out mix-ups. Alright, let's move off the topic of, skilled play and all that, and let's talk about some dumb fun stuff I like to do with this build. I like to change up my look for every area that I'm invading in, which sounds kind of stupid and a little bit vain, but just gives me more variety at the very least to what I'm doing. My playstyle is typically the same between areas, but it's just I like to look a little bit different. Strangely, it just gives me enough variety that I never really get bored playing with this character. Soul level 72 is really nice because I can invade all the way down to soul level 60 plus 6 with a soul level 72 plus 8 character. And then I can also go to Lothric Castle, which is one of my favorite areas to invade. I typically change up my look there and try to look more like a hunter from Bloodborne, because after all, this is a build that was originally supposed to be like a Bloodborne-esque character, like a character that you might find in Bloodborne. And I still try to keep that with like my fashion souls trying to echo Bloodborne. Like here I'm trying to look like a hunter, and in the Grand Archives I'm trying to look like one of those Canehurst knights. It's such a small thing, but it gives just a little tiny bit more lore to what I'm doing, which I like a lot. I love having like these lore builds. And I finally kind of identify, like when you tell girls like, oh, you don't need to dress up for me or anything like that, it's like, it's not for you, it's for me. I feel the exact same way with fashion souls in this game. It's also why I wear the Untrue Dark Ring, because I really hate the way invaders look in this game. The way they just kind of get painted one color. And the only time I really take that ring off is when I'm invading at a specified group, like Aldrich Faithfuls or I have a co-invader, just so that I'm not mistaken for the host and get attacked by another invader. For those of you who don't give even a little bit of a shit about fashion souls and lore invaders and stuff like that, thank you for bearing with the latter half of this video. I respect your validity as a good player, even though you might have a monstrously efficient build, or just a totally min-maxed armor setup. You are just as valid. Snap, snap, snap. Either way, it's just all good fun. This game is somehow still so awesome 4 years later. And even all the jokes about, oh, dead game, and even all the flaws that this PvP experience really has, it's still the most fun I'm having in games. Like, I've been playing other games here and there, but I always circle back around to playing a ton of Souls PvP. And I really do think that there is more Souls PvP coming sooner than we think. There are those of the community who have abandoned all hope, who have declared Elden Ring non-existent and a dead project. But like Mikolash said in his really annoying boss fight in Bloodborne, no, we shall not abandon the dream. And I wanted to make a video coming up soon that's kind of compiling some information that I think we overlooked and some newer information that has just come out in the last week or so about impending Elden Ring news. So that's it for me, guys. Thanks for watching. Here's the stats and gear that I use for this build. Let me know what you guys think, or any improvements that you might make, because you guys do have really good suggestions that I do like to listen to. So, again, thanks for watching, guys.